Hey, Brian, I don't see. Oh, there he is. Never mind.
Yeah, he just popped into the attendees.
Hey, Nordine, just go ahead and accept the panelist. Probably a message you just got. There you go. We do have a quorum. Would you like to get started, Lane, or do you want to?
Let's see. We don't have our mayor or mayor pro tem here.
I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, Kathy's there. Oh, we'll leave it up to Kathy.
Sure. So let's call this meeting to order. It's the special meeting of the City of Marina Council for Tuesday, December 6, 2022. And let's have a roll call, please.
Councilmember McCarthy? Absent. Councilmember Vischer?
Here.
Councilmember Medina Dirksen?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Biola?
Yes, here.
Mayor Delgado.
Okay, so let's do a moment of silence, and would somebody volunteer to do the pledge? Christina, Councilmember Christina Medina Dirksen. Thank you. Let's have a moment of silence. Okay, if you would do the pledge, please.
Stand if you can. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. And let's go to our study session. And this will be an information and public input session regarding the potential future development and conservation areas to inform the development of the mitigation strategy for citywide incidental take permit for the Monterey San Gilia. And we have Aaron, who is going to do the presentation, I believe, unless somebody wants to go ahead of that. And Mayor Delgado just joined, so I'll hand it over to him.
Great. And Mayor Pro Tem, I'll just do a brief overview of where we're at. And with our new protocol, we haven't really identified for study sessions, but we have probably about a 45-minute presentation that Aaron is going to do. And then after that presentation, we'd like to hold the questions and comments until after that presentation. But we think then at that point, maybe follow our kind of new protocol. So each council member will have up to 5 minutes just for initial questions or comments. And then after that first go around, it's kind of wide open for comments. And then after that, we'll open up to public for 3 minutes each. Now, this project that we have here, we've been working on for probably close to 2 years now. And Aaron Harwain is the project manager with Denise Duffy and Associates. She's been around for a long time and knows the area very well, and is one of the experts in doing this type of work. Internally, Matt Mogensen has been leading this project and has been working very closely with Aaron. And from a big picture perspective, what has happened was the city of Marina, like other agencies, when the Fort Ord military base closed, we got a lot of land that was transferred to us. And at that time, the former Fort Ord Reuse Authority was supposed to develop a habitat management plan or habitat conservation plan that was supposed to set aside areas to protect the endangered species and clear for development the other areas. And after 25 years, that that never happened. And so the city of Marina, as well as some of these other agencies, but I think we are kind of one of the leads in moving forward is we are moving forward with developing a habitat management plan. Because in those transfers, we got some habitat management areas that were transferred to us. And for 25 plus years, those areas have not been maintained, monitored, improved, and a lot of invasive species and things have overgrown those. And so the one part of this project is to move forward with developing our habitat management plan, which Aaron has presented previously to the council. And then the other part of the plan is these areas for development in the city. We had a previous meeting where we kind of highlighted those, and then we got direction from council to move forward with getting some details of these areas, which Aaron will go over today. And then also to identify those areas in the city that we could do something that we call an incidental take permit, so that in these areas of the city that we do want to develop, then these endangered species, state and federal law gives us the ability to mitigate those impacts in other areas of the city. And so the outtakes that we want from today, and again, we're looking for, this is not decision making from the council. We're just kind of wanting further direction as we move forward to refine this plan. But one of the things is we want to identify the potential areas of the city that we'd like to use for conservation of these endangered and protected species. And then the other part is we want to look at these areas that are critical for the city's development, whether it be for affordable housing, whether it be for enhancing or improving our tax base, or whether it be for our transportation system. And so we'll be going into detail on that. We're looking for feedback and input on the council that we're going in the right direction, and that these are potential areas that we may want to mitigate, and these areas we want to develop, how we want to develop that. And so with that overview, I will turn it over to Aaron.
Well, thank you very much, Lane, and thank you so much for having us tonight to give you an update on this project. It's been pretty amazing and exciting to work on. There are a lot of layers, so I apologize for the long presentation in advance, but it's really interesting, and I'll walk you through it. I'll introduce some of my other colleagues on this project this evening that are here tonight. I will give you an overview of the study session, and I'm going to expand on Lane's introduction there with some forward history and the background and purpose of the project. We have 2 contracts, as Lane mentioned, and they do have some overlap and some connections, and I want to go over that with you guys and give you an update on those projects. And then we're going to go through each of the study sites and an overview of the potential development and conservation scenarios that we've drafted. Then we'll go over some next steps, and then we'll open for questions and discussion. Next slide, please. Thanks, Matt, for doing the slides. So we have, of course, City Manager Lane Long here this evening, and Matt, the Assistant City Manager. Brian McMinn and Guido and Nordine have been very helpful from a Public Works and, hi Brian, and a community development perspective in terms of connecting our work with other capital improvement projects that are happening in the area, as well as the general plan and zoning update, which is underway. So congrats to the city on moving that forward. And of course, I'm Erin Harwade with Denise Duffing Associates. I've met most of you, I think, but look forward to additional discussions. Next slide. So as Lane mentioned, the purpose of our study session this evening is to provide you an update on this project. Like Lane said, it's been a couple of years. We were last here on December 7th of last year, so almost a whole year. and we've been working diligently to put something together for you all and get on your busy calendars. So we're here finally, and thanks again for having us. I know you guys have a lot of meetings, and an extra Tuesday night is not always fun. So I will give you an overview of the draft development and conservation scenarios. And again, we're really here, no decisions tonight. There are no approvals. We really just want to solicit input from the city council and public on these development and conservation opportunities. And again, it's really to inform the development and conceptualization of our mitigation strategy that'll be included in our incidental take permit or ITP application. And again, working with Guido and the planning department, this really helps inform the general plan and zoning update, the conservation element, land use elements, compatibility issues, and we'll talk about that in a moment too. And of course, inform this habitat management planning process that Lane mentioned. Next slide, please. So some of you are a little new. Some of you haven't heard the whole history and background of Fort Ord, but it really is important to understand how we got where we are right now. Like I said, I was going to expand a little bit on Lane's introduction there. When the former Fort Ord closed back in the early 90s, the Army was required to go through their environmental compliance for the disposal and reuse of the parcels that they transferred over to the local and other jurisdictions. And so as part of that environmental compliance, they needed to comply with the Federal Endangered Species Act. And through that process, which they call a Section 7 consultation process, they were required to prepare and implement a habitat management plan. And I apologize in advance. I'm just speaking acronyms most of the time, and I am happy to clarify any that I forget to spell out. But HMP, you'll see that a lot. That's Habitat Management Plan. It was approved in 1997, and it's basically a federal agency to federal agency agreement and that allows the Army to mitigate for any take of listed species that they would incur as a result of the disposal of the base, including the remediation activities that they are currently, they're still continuing to do. So, however, once those parcels reach a non-federal agency, non-federal entity, once they're transferred over, those non-federal entities are required to comply with a variety of other environmental laws and regulations, including the state Endangered Species Act. And so what has happened is that the take authorization that the Army enjoys for their remediation and disposal activities is not passed on to the non-federal entities. As a non-federal entity, you're required to go through a different process, which is Section 10 under the Endangered Species Act for the federal process, and Section 2081 of the State Endangered Species Act. And both of them have different requirements. And I'm not going to get into the federal requirement because the subject of our discussion tonight, Monterey-Gilia, while it's a federally endangered species, it is the Federal Endangered Species Act does not require incidental take permits for federally listed plants. So we're only concerned as we're moving forward with this process, the state permitting process under the California Endangered Species Act. And you might hear me say CISA, so that's what that is. So when you go through the Section 2081 of CISA, it allows and authorizes incidental take of state listed plants and wildlife. And you can see the definition there. So basically any impacts that would occur from otherwise lawful activities, development projects and whatnot. So why are we doing this? Well, so while the feds enjoyed their agreement and take authorization once the land transferred to non-federal entities, during that time, as you may or may not recall, the Fort Ord Reuse Authority was overseeing redevelopment of the former Fort Ord. And they took on the responsibility in the late 90s to do a habitat conservation plan and get an incidental take permit under section 2081, a base-wide permit, federal and state permit. So big base-wide permit. It included 13 non-federal permittees that wanted to participate in this base-wide permit and included the city of Marina. However, for another discussion and another day, over a nice cup of coffee, we can talk about why that didn't work out, but it didn't work out. The permittees decided not to move forward with it, and everyone decided to go on it on their own. So now the city of Marina is on their own. They are trying to be proactive and look ahead with their four-door properties and their Monterey Gilead occurrences on those properties and determine a permitting process and strategy to move forward. So I know that's a lot, so I'm going to continue on, and I'm happy to take questions at the end. Next slide, please. So again, why are we doing this? Why are we trying to be proactive? Well, it's a really admirable, holistic approach. It's the right thing to do, right? You want to not result in a piecemealed or fragmented conservation strategy for these parcels, and we'll get into those specifically in a little bit. But what you really want to do is think about what mitigation strategy you'll need moving forward. And so when there's a take, you need an incidental take permit, and where you need an incidental take permit, you're required to have a mitigation strategy. I spoke to some of you last night, and thanks so much for those that attended the open house. It was really fun to see people in person and chat about Gilead and answer questions and introduce people to the project. So thanks again for your attendance. So as I was mentioning last night, generally there's a minimum 3-to-1 mitigation ratio for ITP permits with the state. It varies by species, but it really varies by the extent and intensity of the impact and what mitigation strategy you're looking at. So every permit application and every permit issued is its own unique situation. So we are kind of going in blind, but hopefully this conversation with you all will help inform our strategies. So again, we might be looking at requiring, separate from the IT permit process, I did want to mention that as these projects move forward in front of you, there's nothing to stop you to require avoidance or minimization measures for projects to design to avoid impacts. So, I mean, this isn't the end all be all, the only option in the world. CEQA process is always at hand as well. But ultimately, looking ahead, the city sees that there are a number of parcels, future potential development parcels on the former Fort Ord that are constrained. Development opportunities are constrained by the presence of Monterey Gilead. So given the set that we have, we're looking for a balance between development and conservation. So we're really looking forward to getting input tonight about where the city wants to focus conservation and what parcels might be more important to you for development opportunities. Maybe some are a little bit better for development than others. So it's really trying to find that balance, because the ultimate take home from this is that you can't build out each of these sites. You are constrained. So it's finding that balance of how much you want to conserve, how much you want to try to develop. So it's finding that balance. Thanks, Matt. Next slide. We got a request last night for some pictures. So thank you, Dr. Fred Watson, for sending this over. These plants are very, very small, sometimes as big as your thumbnail. As you can see here with the ruler, 8 centimeters and very low to the ground. So that gives you a little idea of what they look like. Here's another picture. So this is a pin flag over here. Oh, next slide. Sorry, I've got 2 different things going on. Let's see. Okay, thanks, Matt. That's a pin flag there, so you can get a measure of or idea of the size, as well as when you zoom in and when you can actually see grains of sand, you know you're looking at something small. So, okay, next slide. So as I mentioned, we have 2 contracts currently with the city. One is for the compliance required under the Habitat Management Plan. Now, I know I said already that it was a federal to federal agreement, but what happens with the Habitat Management Plan is that there's a compliance clause in each of the quitclaim deeds. So when the land is transferred, it says, we will comply with the HMP requirements. And because the city received owns now 4 different habitat management areas, which you'll see me acronym those as HMAs. We have the Marina Northwest corner HMA, we have the airport HMA, the Salinas River HMA, and now most recently the landfill HMA. Each of those have different requirements outlined in the HMP. As part of the overall mitigation for the Army, those habitat management areas, not just marinas, but the others on former Fort Ord, have different requirements embedded within them. And one of those requirements is that the land recipients are to prepare resource management plan for their HMAs to ensure management and monitoring of those sites in perpetuity. So we're working with the city to document the resources on each of these sites and recommend various management and monitoring activities for perpetuity, and also a cost estimate. And cost is important. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So different, but the overlap with our ITP contract that we're discussing, project that we're discussing tonight, is that again, these are intermeshed. So what happens with the ITP mitigation strategy may help inform some of the management activities in the resource management plan, may dovetail on some of those requirements. And also, if you're potentially using, and I'll get into these details again, using some of those HMAs like the landfill or Northwest Corner for conservation areas for some of the take that might occur as a result of the development and future, the development and the sites that we're going to discuss. There's just some correlation there. So we have gone out to all of these study sites and worked closely with Dr. Fred Watson on gathering Monterey-Gilead compliant occurrence data in the various sites. We've looked at land use and zoning, and based again on our conversation back in last December, we crafted some potential development and conservation scenarios. Okay, next slide, please. Thanks, Matt. Okay, because our meeting was a little while ago, I wanted to remind you guys what we heard. We did get input from council and the public, including Dr. Watson. Like I said, he's been our working group colleague on this project. Thanks again, Dr. Watson, for your time and expertise. So we heard a few things at the meeting. We heard that we needed a map to show some regional context for Gilead occurrences. We don't want to plan in a vacuum. We don't want to show that that Gilead only occurs in the 7 or 8 sites that we're looking at. You guys all requested some various development and conservation scenarios. We heard some concern about mitigation and restoration success. We heard the need and want for a disc golf course at the Salinas Reservation Road parcel. We heard the need to balance conservation with also affordable housing and other city needs. We heard the concern for the existing activities that might be impacting Gilead, homeless encampments, fires, trash cleanup. You know, you guys have ongoing activities in these parcels, and there was some concern about take and preservation in those areas. And you requested, of course, that we continue to coordinate with Dr. Watson on the development and conservation scenarios. Next slide. So this is the regional map that we prepared in response to the request. And I'll walk you through this a little bit. And Matt, I don't know if you can put some cursors over the various areas. So first of all, we kept our focus to former Fort Ord. So that's the boundary that you do see here. Starting at kind of the top right of the legend, you can see CNDDB occurrence data. The CNDDB is a statewide database that's overseen by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they record occurrence data that's submitted by the public and experts and professionals out there. So it's the California Natural Diversity Database. So we use our subscription to find where occurrences have been documented in the past. And so those are here in these little purple spotted bubbles. Then you'll see 3 shades of pink, and that is data that's been compiled since 1991, starting with the Army's baseline flora and fauna study, and then supplemented by project level studies over time. This is what we used for the preparation of Gilia occurrence data for the draft habitat conservation plan that Lane and I were mentioning. So that gives you a regional context. So the sites that we're looking at are not in a vacuum here. There are other occurrences of Gilia in the area, and this is where they occur. So on the right-hand column of the legend, you'll see the 7 sites that we're kind of focused on here today, with a couple caveats. Matt, maybe you can put your cursor up in the top right in the gray area. The airport master plan area we surveyed, Fred's gone out to portions of that as well. We've not found any Gilia on that site, so we've kind of taken it out of the formula here. The other parcel that's or area site that is of interest is the landfill HMA. Matt, maybe you can put your cursor over that guy. We'll get into some more detail about that. It's not really a developable site. It might be more of a conservation site. And again, I'll get into those details. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to reiterate, we've got 7 sites that we're focused on: 8th Street North, South, the Airport Business Park, Future Cypress Knolls, Preston Park, Salinas Avenue, Reservation Road, and the Marina Northwest Corner HMA. Next slide. All right, this is the fun part. We're gonna go site by site, and we're gonna talk about the land use and the zoning of each of these sites. After each of these slides is a zoomed in picture of each of the site. We had these on the poster boards at last night's open house. So we can show you where Gilia occurs. You can kind of get a feel of the site. It's a nice zoomed in aerial. And also, I think Matt will make this presentation available on PDF for you guys. A couple things we're going to do here. One is I want to point out that this data that we've collected for Monterey Gilia goes way back, I think 96 and to 2006 to, oh crap, let me look. Matt, will you go back to the regional map real quick and maybe zoom into the legend? Awesome, thank you. Yes, 2006 to 2022. And as you can see there, from the data comes from DD&A and also Dr. Fred Watson. So thanks. You can go back to 8th Street North, please. Slide. So what's interesting, DD&A does Gilia surveys for different reasons that Dr. Watson does. And so our methodology over the years hasn't always been the same as Dr. Watson. So we call points and polygons a little differently. So we're sticking with points for this discussion. A point for DD&A counts as 1 plant. Dr. Watson's points count as 1 to 10 plants. So while we're talking about points, we're not talking about individuals. Well, we are talking about individuals, but I didn't want to get too bogged down on the numbers. Like 91 here is here to show you the magnitude of the occurrence. And so we've documented 91 points, for example, within this parcel, and in addition, about 1/100th of an acre. So we're going to go over each of these sites, and we'll look at the aerial next slide. And then you all received an Exhibit B. And so we'll go over some of those constraints and opportunities that we outlined in Exhibit B. So some of the opportunities for the site, it's good for office or university compatible uses. There are discrete locations of Gilead that could be avoided, new tax revenue and new jobs. Some of the constraints, downsides, no major road visibility, utility access is further away, could be a city yard site or public facilities parcel, possible rezoning is required. So, okay, we're gonna go to the next one. So 8th Street South, kind of similar, few more occurrences, right? And we're at 0.05 of an acre. Commercial and public facilities is the land use. Next slide. Zooming in here. Oh, and maybe, Matt, will you just put your cursor on the inset so they can see contextually where that works in the city? Great, thank you. Okay, so, oh, did I read? I read 8th Street North or South for 8th Street North. I'm so sorry. So, okay, everything I just said for 8th Street North was for 8th Street South. I'm sorry, I've got too many screens. Can we go back to the 8th Street North? Matt, I'm so sorry. The aerial. Thank you. It's the downside of IT and Zooming for me. Okay, 8th Street North is a different animal. So large scale development is possible. It's got good visibility if combined with MGM Parkway facing for parcels. Again, it like 8th Street South, it has discrete Gilead populations that could be avoided, good access to roads and utilities, new property and potentially new sales taxes and new jobs. Constraints are not large enough without combining into other parcels. Open space cuts to the south end of the parcels for horse trails. Concern about maybe land use compatibility with munitions and explosives of concern. Zone change is required as the radio tower property is zoned open space, and there would be a loss of open space. Okay, so let's go back to 8th Street South. Aerial, thank you. Okay, so again, good use for office or university uses, discrete Gilead could be avoided, good or new tax revenue and new jobs. However, no major road visibilities, utility access further away, could be a city yard on public facilities, possible rezone required. Okay. Next slide, please.
Aaron, I was going to ask really quickly if it is it helpful for us to give a little context of the location too? I don't know if the council needs a larger context.
Well, I was thinking about that too. There was a regional map in the packet that they could refer to. And then those insets I was hoping would help.
Yeah, I was just suggesting like here, this, for example, this is the promontory buildings. It's CSUMB, just to give you a bit of
Okay, I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Yeah.
So these parcels are directly to the north of that.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to do that on the following ones, that'd be great.
Sure.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Okay, Airport Business Park. Land use and zoning, it's obviously an airport business park and public facilities. There are a lot of Gilead occurrences and an increase in acres that you've seen from the other sites. Next slide, please.
So the context, yeah, for this location is this is the first building you come to on the right when you enter the airport. It's where Joby has half of it and Surpass has the other half. This is where the Joby tent is, and this is the undeveloped area out to the east of that.
Thanks, Matt. That's helpful, and it gives my voice a break. So as you can see from the site, the Gilead is grouped in some areas, but it also is a substantial population. But combined with UC MBES properties, I think the park plan identifies up to 876 1,000 square feet of developable space and 5,177 high-tech related jobs. It fits the vision of the Fort Ord Reuse Plan, General Plan, and Airport Master Plan. Uses are compatible with the airport. Lease revenue to support maintenance and development of the airport. New property taxes for the city. Provides needed light industrial and commercial space in Marina. Good airfield access for flexibility of uses. Again, the Monterey population, Gilead populations are more extensive at this site, difficult to avoid. And there's also a loss of habitat that would result from the development of the site. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Okay, future Cypress Knolls. Currently it's zoned residential. As you can see, it also has quite a bit of Gilead occurrences within it and about 1/10 of an acre. So moving to opportunities and constraints, Ariel. Okay, Matt, you're on.
Oh, I believe everybody knows where Cypress Knolls property is located, but.
Okay, probably. All right. Sounds good. Well, you can see here that Cypress Knolls is an interesting site. It's been around as military housing for a long time, and Gilead's been there all the while. It's remained consistent in some very interesting places. And so you can see it's kind of on the top of ridges, and I'm sure Fred will want to speak to that a little bit later. But it's you guys have a specific plan for it already in place, but you're working on new visioning. Some of the opportunities are 500 plus new homes. There's good access to IMGN and utilities. Commercial uses are possible. Removal of blight, increased, which is I think ongoing. Increased tax revenue, supports affordable workforce housing, supports policies of the general plan. Gilead populations are difficult to avoid in this area. You could do SWAS, and you'll see those in our various development conservation scenarios. But it would be hard to completely avoid Gilead within the site. Added infrastructure costs would be associated with avoidance of Gilead populations, and potentially reduced number of homes would result from Gilead avoidance. All right. Got a little bit behind. All right, Preston Park. This is a kind of funny little parcel site over in the Preston Park housing area. We're not quite sure. Zoned open space or residential. We're trying to work to confirm that. There are a couple points that were recorded for Gilead. Not a huge population. Next slide. And why don't you give the context here, since it's kind of, yeah.
Sure. This is a kind of an undeveloped, I guess, funny shaped site that is between Abrams Drive on the Preston Park side, and then the Preston Park ball fields up here to the top of the page. I'm not sure if that's north. That might be more northwest, I guess.
Thanks, Matt. So as you can see, there's only a couple little Gilead points in here. So you could avoid those. The site has good access to utilities and streets. You could add residential, 100 plus residential units, affordable housing site. Those are, the possibilities are endless, I guess. Requires zone change. For residential, you are losing some open space. We're not sure if there's water, access to financing, and no new property taxes would occur at this site. Okay, next one. So Salinas Avenue, Reservation Road, I think you guys are all pretty familiar with this site. It's public facilities and possibly residential. We're getting some conflicting results. And when I'm mentioning these conflicting results and confirming some of these zoning and land use designations, we're working with Guido to fix any inconsistencies and identify them, so that helps him with his process. As you can see, there's a pretty substantial population of Gilead at this site, almost, a little over 2/10 of an acre. So let's talk about you want to give that axe? Well, go ahead.
I believe everybody knows what this one is as well. It's in the corner of Reservation in Salinas.
I think so too. Okay, great. So With this site, it's you could be considered a gateway to downtown prime commercial land, good access for vehicles and utilities, commercial land use compatible with surrounding if buffered, could increase tax revenue, new jobs. And there's that interest that I brought up earlier about the disc golf course. Some constraints are the size and the shape of the property, more difficult for efficient development. Monterey Gilead populations are definitely difficult to completely avoid. Could be a loss of open space for commercial, requires a zone change for commercial. Could be a good park rec space, however, would not provide revenue to support conservation. All right. Okay, now to Marina Northwest Corner. This is the habitat management area. And to give you a little bit of background and going back to when we were discussing those HMP requirements for your various 4 HMAs, the Marina Northwest Corner allows for a road through the site, and it allows for development within parcel as long as you avoid a population of Yadian's piperia. Again, it's a whole nother project and discussion, but the big picture is that it's currently zoned as open space. There is a substantial Gilead population. And so when you're talking about opportunities and constraints, Matt, you want to give them a context? I think most people would know where this is.
Yeah, this is the area where we talked about the Del Monte extension. And I think Brian's going to dive in pretty deep to details on that pretty soon.
Yeah, we're going to dive into that a little bit too. So as you can see, if you wanted to put a road through this parcel north to south, it's pretty hard to completely avoid the Gilead, and we'll talk about our efforts to do that a little bit later. But in terms of this parcel, it does connect North and South Marina commercial districts. Potentially, you could add commercial space along the new roadway with freeway access and visibility. It would encourage people to drive through businesses in Del Monte versus the freeway, provide for bikes, scooters, walkers to have access to both sides of Marina. Again, the constraints being Monterey Gilead, difficult to avoid, loss of open space, and the zone change required. All right, next slide. Okay. So I wanted to go back and touch on the landfill HMA. We pointed it out in the regional map. It's on the next slide as well. It's not currently zoned or has a land use designation under the general plan or marina zoning ordinance because you just received it and Guido hasn't done that yet. He'll be working on that, I'm sure. So we do have some Monterey Gilead populations on the site and a good substantial acreage. So going to the next slide, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background. Some of you have been around long enough to remember when Whispering Oaks was proposed by MST on this parcel, and the project was eliminated. It went through referendum. It was it's not a very developable site. Everyone enjoys using it as open space. There's a lot of recreational users that go through here. But due to past opposition and landfill cap restrictions, this is the former landfill. Actually, it's still some of the cells are still active. They're still putting lead remediation soil into the landfill. And the biological resources on the site really make it difficult to develop. Also, there's a proposed 4-tag alignment in the western portion, and portions may be required for mitigation for Gilead impacts associated with the Emden Parkway Improvements Project. So while we were thinking that this might be a bigger participating parcel as a conservation for some of the other development in these sites that we've been discussing, we're not quite sure of its potential because we're still waiting for that ITP to be issued for Emden Parkway. We don't know what's available on the site. So it's kind of sitting there as a potential possibility for something, but we're not sure what. So I also just wanted to make everyone aware that we do recognize that there are uses like 4-tag and easements and utilities and land use restrictions and other issues to consider in all of these parcels, all these sites that we're looking at. But again, we're at the first step at this ITP process, really developing this conceptual mitigation strategy. So, 30,000 feet, we're looking at starting to define this strategy. And trust me, when we get to the end process and we do the due diligence and the lands package and we sharpen our pencils, we will be digging deep into all of the other uses to make sure that we're not promising conservation where it's not feasible. All right. Next slide. Sure. I need a sip of water. Okay, so I have 3 development and conservation scenarios to show you. And as a preface, these are drafts. These are not wedded in stone. They are here as discussion items to be manipulated by our input this evening. So the first one is complete avoidance. And we wanted to prepare this scenario for you all because we wanted to show you what it looked like. Well, what if you tried to just completely avoid all the Gilead in these various sites? And so what we did is we placed a 50-foot buffer on the various points and polygons that we went through side by side. And we carved out very roughly, it's not pretty, there's some weird angles, but we cut out some conceptual development envelopes so you could get an idea of the acreage that might be available to develop on these sites if you tried to avoid Gilead. So next slide, please. Thanks, Matt. So, it's not pretty. You look at Cypress Knolls and it's like, oh, how do you make a development work there? How do you get roads through? How do you get people through? What does that look like? Again, this is, really rough and conceptual, but we wanted to give you an idea. So for example, again, take a look at the airport business park area. Again, it's got a substantial Gilead population in that southwest corner. What if you tried to avoid all of it and constrain development to just the 61.5 acres? So I just wanted to give you guys a magnitude of what avoidance would look like and what that option looks like to you. Okay, next one. All right, this one we just tried to look at a way where we could maximize or increase development a little bit, but minimize the amount of take. So this is the beginning of where you conceptualize these mitigation strategies, and you're playing a numbers game, you're moving things around, you're trying to figure out the best balance. So we increase some of those development parcels, minimize take by taking these discrete, independent, scattered populations. And again, we still have that 50-foot buffer from those points and polygons. So let's take a look at that one, Matt. So you can see Cypress Knolls is smoothed out a little bit, some increase and additional development is in 8th Street North and South. Preston Park, I think we included it all as take. It's just a small population. So development of the entire site. And keeping that middle section of Salinas and Reservation open to avoid as much as we could. Okay, let's go to the next one. So this is the largest take scenario. So this scenario looks at basically what the map that we just looked at to be the minimized take, but also includes full development of the airport business park. It includes the Del Monte Boulevard extension project alignment as currently drafted. And it also includes some additional development in the Cypress Knolls area. Next slide. So you can see the Cypress Knolls area is a little cleaned up. There's 2 separate polygons that preserve the Gilead in the center of the site, and take would occur in the remaining area of the parcel. You can see to the left of Cypress Knolls, you'd have Del Monte, the proposed Del Monte extension and what that would look like. And then again, at the Airport Business Park, complete development of that site. I don't know if the numbers would ever pencil out on something like this. In terms of what's feasible in the world of permitting, it's probably something between this and 2C and 2B. But again, we're not focused on the numbers tonight. We really want to hear from you about what components of these maps you like or dislike, what areas you might prefer for conservation versus development. So again, please keep that in mind, that don't get bogged down in the numbers. That's my job after I get all your input. And then we'll be back to discuss that with you. So again, 30,000 feet, what are you thinking for development and conservation? All right, next slide.
So,
This one I hand it to you, Brian, to talk a little bit
Yes.
about Del Monte. Thank you.
Brian McMahon, Public Works Director, and Matt, it might work better if I share the PowerPoint for these next few slides, because for me to talk to your cursor around the screen is going to be very frustrating. So, okay. Can you see the PowerPoint presentation? It looks good. Okay. So everybody's heard of, most people have heard of the Del Monte Boulevard extension, and most people understand that it's a connection from downtown to what's being developed south of kind of Imjin Parkway there, and the Dunes development, commercial areas to the south. So it's a connecting roadway. It provides an arterial road connection, an alternative route traveled, and other than through the residential neighborhoods, we're still kind of saddled with the limited connectivity that was in place when Fort Ord was here. It was a closed military base with limited connectivity to Marina. Provide a north and south connection to Highway 1 to improve access to the downtown area. Currently, if you want to get to the downtown heading southbound on 1, you have to exit at Reservation Road. Or if you miss that, you take the Imjin exit and then you do an about face and get back on the northbound ramp to get back into the downtown. Provide a frontage road connector from Del Monte to Light Fighter Boulevard and Seaside. It's for emergency access at times. It can be a viable route. Provide future access points to Cypress Knolls as that develops out, providing access on the west side of Cypress Knolls. And we all know that there's traffic issues on Imjin and Highway 1, and that's going to grow over time. It's part of a plan for addressing that, and it's gonna, part of the bigger project is to address the merging and weaving on Highway 1 between Del Monte Boulevard and Imjin Road, and I can kind of walk through these in the next diagram, which is really colorful. A lot of lines that are going all over the place, but it's a schematic traffic flow diagram. So the alignment for this Del Monte Boulevard is not exactly as it's proposed, but it's to help see how traffic might flow. So north is to the right. You got downtown over here at the right, the existing Del Monte Boulevard. You got Highway 1 heading through here. Here's Imjin Parkway on the left side of the screen, or the south. So we see that the Del Monte Boulevard connects the downtown with the Dunes development area, but it's a phase in a much bigger plan to address traffic, not only for Marina in here, but also to help relieve congestion at the Imjin Parkway interchange here, and ultimately involves adding an additional interchange right here between where we currently get on at Del Monte and Imjin Parkway. So currently traffic, as you're heading south on Del Monte, you're merging onto Highway 1 at the same time when cars are trying to take the exit to Imjin Parkway. And that's where that weaving and merging occurs. And also the way it's configured right now, there's a traffic signal here, so you get the queuing from either direction. That contributes to some of the traffic congestion at certain times of the day. What this does, by putting this interchange here, the southbound traffic have an option to take the exit for getting to downtown. It provides the on-ramp for the people that usually get on with the existing ramp. They would come down through here and get back on, get on the southbound one. It eliminates the exit for Imjin Parkway here. If people wanted to get to Imjin Parkway, they would be taking the new interchange and then over to Imjin Parkway if they're southbound. But what really helps by eliminating this off ramp and this queue here is you don't have the traffic signal. You don't have the queuing for the westbound traffic, which is one of the primary movements of the traffic on Imjin Parkway, especially in the morning. So it's part of a bigger scheme to improve circulation, eliminate congestion on Imjin, also tying in the extension of Patton Parkway in this and improving circulation past the high school. Currently, it's kind of an in and out in the mornings for drop-offs. It's not the most best flow for traffic. And so this is Del Monte in the bigger picture of what will be happening in the future. We previously had presented and received input from City Council about concerns, impacts of the Sangillia. And you can see kind of that population, the largest population of Sangillia right here, kind of in the middle of that Aaron was showing earlier. So Council had asked staff to look into moving the alignment to the south and potentially encroaching slightly on the high school property. We did find an alignment that would work with that, but we did meet with the school district staff, and they indicated that they do have plans for expansion in this area, and it would not be compatible with their future use of that site. And then also there was direction to look into the possibility of moving it more over onto the Caltrans right away. What this does is it moves it into the coastal zone. And we did discuss this with Caltrans, and you know, there's a process that the city would have to go through. It could potentially add 2 to 4 years to the project, and potentially 800,000 or more in cost to the project. And ultimately, there's no guarantee that the city would prevail in that effort, because Caltrans would have to analyze all the encroachments onto their operations of the freeway itself. And also, you know, just wanted to make it understood that there were no surveys for Sangillia in the Caltrans right away. So there's no guarantee that this population does not extend into that right away that we're looking at as well. So we've looked in those two possibilities, but bringing it back to the greater context of future plans for addressing traffic congestion and traffic flow in the area, what we're going to see is that it's too close to the interchange here to efficiently work and accomplish what we're trying to do with the traffic in the area. So we're kind of bring it back to where it was the last time. The orange lines are proposed Del Monte extension and Patton Parkway extension, and then you see this kind of line that's snaking around the outside of it. That's the limits of the grading for the project itself. This is a fairly extensive population. No matter where you try to go in this alignment, there would be some take of Sangillia. There's just no way of doing this in a no-take approach. But staff clearly understands that avoidance of take or minimization of take is definitely the goal with this. And what this hasn't done is looked at potential retaining wall type structures to minimize the footprint of the project. in areas where the Sangillia is present, and also looking at what the road would accommodate. Like I'm going to go back a slide here just a little bit so you can see what the proposed Del Monte accommodates for traffic on here. And down on the lower left here, you see that some of the cross sections, and what these cross sections are showing is a vehicle travel lane in each direction, medians, separated bike lanes on the roadway. And this width provides the city the ability to go from 2 lanes to 4 lanes as traffic grows in the future, and currently has separate bike path separated from the roadway grade, and then a separate pedestrian path. So it's designed to accommodate and provide a connection for bicycles and pedestrians, which is needed in kind of that north-south direction. Currently, there's a north-south travel on the rec trail and the state parks land, but the connectivity east and west is limited to certain locations, such as near Ryan Dollar and 5th Street to the south. So it's limited on the ability to get north and south. And I think I'm going to stop my share here and turn it back over to
Brian, if I may just add one item. This is Nordine Kayara, project manager, that I've been working on this project for a while. Can you go back to what that last alignment, please, Brian? The current alignment.
There we go. That one?
Yes. So this final alignment actually is modified from the initial alignment that was designed, and actually we did like a 60% design on the original one that was a little bit to the south of this, taking more more Sangillia. So we ultimately came up with this design that really minimized the take, and still from an engineering and a topography standpoint still works and avoids the access denial, which really borders Caltrans right away there. Anything further to the west towards Caltrans right away, as Brian mentioned, would dictate a whole long process of applying for an access denial infringement, and that's almost like a red line with Caltrans. Anytime you want to basically cross that line, it's a very, very lengthy and difficult process to have to start through their headquarters down the line. So it's a lengthy and costly process and very, very low rate of success. So this is the ultimate alignment that we came up with, that really taking the Sangillia into account and at the same time making it work from a Caltrans right away. Thank you.
And we can turn it over to Aaron and Lane to kind of wrap it up here. And or Matt, do you want to share that slides again? Okay, there you go.
Thanks, Brian and Nordine, and thanks, Matt. So we are looking at our next steps ahead in the beginning of the year, and we realize that this is a lot of information tonight and a lot of information to go through and digest. So we wanted to, although there's no public review required, we thought it'd be a good idea to give the public and council an opportunity to digest this information and send us any comments by mid-January. It's about a month, and email those to Matt would be great. And then we're going to hopefully take the input tonight and turn it into a conceptual mitigation strategy to present with CDFW and get their input and understand what the regional ITP requirements, application requirements look like for something at this magnitude. And then we're going to bring it back to you all and the public and let you know how things are going. So with that, I'll hand it over to Lane and look forward to a productive discussion.
Yeah, I don't really have anything more to add add to this. As Aaron said, we do want to take more comments really for the next month. So give everyone time to digest the presentation. If you have questions, you can talk with us, you can talk with staff, and we'll really keep that comment period open so we can get that feedback again, because we know this is a lot of first time you're seeing this information. But we really appreciate Erin. She's worked so hard on this, and of course Dr. Fred Watson, who's been a great help in working with and identifying these species. And so I think we'll just turn it back to the council, Mayor. And
right. Thank you. I know you're doing your best, Aaron, to make this digestible for you and staff and the city council. And I think you've done a good job pulling it together the best you can. But it's like an octopus with moving parts. And so procedurally, we're giving input tonight. And then I thought you said you're going to go to CDFW, and then January 13th is a deadline for maybe more input. At that point, would you go back if there was substantive input? Say January 13th, would you go back to CDFW a second time?
Thank you for that clarifying question. We will take your comments through January 13th. We'll continue to work on drafting that conceptual mitigation strategy. We wouldn't meet with, if I misspoke, I apologize, with CDFW probably in February, but we'd want to get all the comments and input first before putting something together and presenting it to CDFW.
Okay, so tonight's input, are you just gonna sit on it and do nothing until mid-January when you've got it all? Or
I don't sit on anything, Mayor.
All right, so you'll play with the input you got tonight. And I
Yeah.
think it's probably a fair assumption that a good percentage of the input you get is gonna be tonight. I think as life goes on, we tend to forget, and it's not tomorrow's fire, it's tonight's fire, and that's when you're gonna hear most of our comments. But anyway, so I'm glad you're not gonna sit on it, even though it'd be okay if you did, because it makes procedural sense. All right, Anita, can you start my 5-minute clock? We have a new procedure to Aaron to not let me talk so much or anyone else before everybody else gets a bite at the apple. So we can try to get that 5-minute clock going to keep me within. So my big to-do is the Northwest Habitat Management Area. We were just talking about it, close to Highway 1. Lane and Brian and Nordine and Matt, is it possible that in the near term, that would probably take us for the next 10 or 15 years, if we just did a bike ped 4-tag like trail that avoided Gilead, because waiting for this car connection is going to be a lot of years. And it's a 13-second car drive from the Shell gas station when you get on the on-ramp to where you get off at Imgen. So it's very convenient for motorized cars, electric cars, whatever, to get to South Marina. It's the opposite for anyone that's pedestrian or bicyclist. So I see that there's benefits to the overall planning to put in a new car connection, but nobody's screaming for a new car connection right now. The real concern is that you can't get there without a car. And so if we had a non-Gilead impactful route that was like a 4-tag that could squiggle and jig and jag where it needed to, you can't do that with a higher speed limit vehicle route, automobile route. So is there any potential to put in a 4-tag little trail before we ever get to a full blowout?
I would say, are we answering questions now?
Yes, questions, comments, they're all combined.
Okay. I would say yes, it's a possibility. It would be a project. We would be going through a lot of the same processes that we'd be going through with the Del Monte extension. I don't want people to think that there wouldn't be a process with CDFW. I think no matter where we would go with the trail through there, it's going to be, we're probably going to have to apply for a permit. And just because an individual plant hasn't been identified in a particular area in there, I think they're going to view that as potential habitat. So I think we'd still have to go through that process with CDFW.
All right, can you go back to that map that Nordine was talking about, which is a revised
Let me-
on Armageddon option? Because it avoids the Caltran and the forbidden zone.
This one,
The last map we saw that had the, yeah, that one.
this is the map.
Yeah, so that's the revised vision or whatever plan. It takes out 2/3 of that yellow population in Gilead. It takes out about 1/3 or 40% of the whatever colored dots those are, and some yellow. So I mean, how is that even it seems like that's a non-starter. So how will we get around, let's say we did this, where would we mitigate for that loss of Gilead?
So I guess, Aaron, could you clarify? I think that yellow is a different species on this map.
Yeah, I was just pulling it up. I think that's wallflower.
Yeah,
So
post wallflower.
post wallflower, which isn't listed, but it is special status. So
Okay, all right. In the previous map, the legend that you showed us, the yellow was Fred's.
Yeah,
So the only Gilead then is that purple or blue?
the purple or magenta. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
There's some Gilead in here and a couple over here. And this is the area where we'd be looking at the majority of the take. I would say there's a lot of good prime Gilead habitat in here that could be put into conservation, and you know, in working through it with CDFW, we'll know a little bit better once we get the ITP issued for Engine Parkway. But you know, our hope is that they would view that as you know, a good mitigation ratio area, because there is an existing population that is really robust there.
you're talking about taking what's in the way and then mitigating with what's not in the way.
Putting into conservation what's not affected.
Okay.
And
The-
Mary,
Yeah.
just to add on a couple of things, because that's part of what we're wanting to look at today is those areas that we potentially would want to reserve for offsite mitigation. As Brian mentioned here, obviously the landfill, some of the Salinas Reservation Avenue area, we may want to look at that for offsite mitigation. Another issue that's associated with the Del Monte connection, it really is the congestion on Imgen continues to get worse. And so where it used to be, and so when you talk about, can we just set it aside for 15 years, I think we would have complete failure on that interchange there. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I wasn't saying to set it aside. I'm saying that's how long I think it's going to take before we have an automobile road. It's going to be a big, long project. So in the meantime, I was wondering if we could put in a four-tag trail, not to replace it or sit on it, don't do anything. All right, let's go to a real easy one. Preston Park, is it possible to expand the ball fields if they're needed toward the south and still protect most of the open space on that Preston Park piece? Because there's good maritime chaparral. It's not just, the only value there is not just Gilead. Gilead is not the only value there. It's really good maritime chaparral. So I'm wondering if at Preston Park, if we needed to expand the ball fields, could we do that? Maybe we take a little bit of Gilead, maybe we don't, but could we protect most of that maritime chaparral that's on the Preston Park parcel?
Lane, you want me to pop in?
Yes,
Yeah.
please do.
So see the ball field, is that the ball field just to the north of it?
That's the soccer field.
Okay.
Yeah, and the ball fields are just to the north of that soccer field.
Okay, so if you put a soccer field south of there or a baseball field, you'd basically be extending toward the south, that ball field area. But, well, you wouldn't even be taking any Gilead now that I see it. And you'd be still protecting, 60% of the area or 50% of the area. So is that in the ballpark something that we could do and balance what Aaron was talking about, development with conservation?
Yes, absolutely. That was one of those thoughts that we've talked about internally.
Okay, because I've always just liked the idea of, developing Preston Park at the, at the detriment to just wiping out all that maritime chaparral. So maybe there's a balance there. Okay, you don't have to move any maps around, but did the airport specific plan identify this Gilead conflict, or is this new information that wasn't in that document?
These are new information that wasn't in that document.
So the airport Gilead, I didn't notice any yellow from Fred. I noticed all the purple or whatever from DDA. So did DDA do that more recently since the airport plans were produced?
I would say this mapping effort was in support of the environmental review for the Joby project. So
after all the airport documents were done by the city.
I don't know hear those, so I don't know.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, and then the same question about the Cypress Knolls EIR. All the documents that we did for the Cypress Knolls, did they identify any Gilead conflict?
Yes, the EIR did.
How did it deal with the conflict? Because they were plastering the area with homes.
And they wanted to get a permit. In fact, they contracted Front Porch, contracted DD&A back in 2009, and then the recession, and they were never heard from again to do the ITP.
Okay. Is there a larger conflict now because in the last 10 years since 2009, you've documented more Gilead in the Cypress Knolls area than was known by Front Porch era?
I don't think so. I think it's been pretty stable population. I'd have to look at the numbers though and get back to you, Mayor.
Okay. Is there any update status on the UC Mbest's 8th Street parcel? Not our north and not our south, but a different parcel that we call the 8th Street UC parcel?
To the west of the landfill?
Yeah. Like, what are they going to do with that parcel? They might not know. I mean, it's kind of out.
I have not heard anything.
Yeah, I'm not aware. And you're about at 30 seconds, Mayor, left.
Okay. If I have more, I'll ask later. Let's go to anybody else. Please raise your hand or take your hand so I can see it. Okay, let's go to Mayor Pro Tem Kathy Biala.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to ask a really simple question just for the public, but also for everyone else. Obviously, this is an endangered species, and we know by law we're required to do certain things, but this is not quite looking at an endangered species like, I don't know, the Smith's blue butterfly. I think Western snowy plover is just threatened, but to the average person, those are species that we sort of intuitively know we want to keep. Because they're adorable or because, they're beautiful when we see them. This is, as you have pointed out, is a very small plant that apparently during some seasons are pretty non-existent actually, except during flowering season or whatever. So can you explain to me, and particularly because some of the Sanguilia we're going to have to maybe fence off, et cetera. So it's not even that we're going to be able to enjoy it necessarily close up. So in that context, can you sum up why this species is important, so important to preserve? It is in terms of the ecosystem, is there something that another species that thrives on it? So we really want to be concerned about the extinction of these plants.
Lane, you got that one, right?
I'd say that the mayor is a far more expert in those areas than I am.
Yes.
Ryan, I would love for I think that's a great question. I would love for Dr. Watson to weigh in. My environmental ethics are different than everyone else's, but biodiversity just in general is an important thing for the planet, and species going extinct is really not what we want in the world, despite its importance to some species, some other species, whether it be a bee or a human. So, but I don't know if Dr. Watson wants to bring in on that one.
Yeah, Matt, if you could, before you talk, Fred, the past council was extremely concerned about harming any of the Sanguilia. So I don't want to forget, the last time we met a year ago, I was really happily surprised how strong they were in the direction of protecting Gilia, because some of the largest populations in the world that are left are here on Marina city property. And so what we do has a lot to do with the future of this species. And it's like the snowy plover and the Smith's blue butterfly, but it's even more constrained in its distribution than those species. And so you can get caught up in the cute and the furry, but the biological and the science and the ethics are not predicated upon the cute and furry. And so the biological rarity of this species is on the plant side. It's almost like the condor. It's really, it's really restricted in its range and abundance, and it doesn't move around much. So you take where it is, and it's not coming back in these new places. It's really, whereas some other things can move around a little bit. You can plant more buckwheat on different beaches, and if it's done right, you'll get some Smith's blue butterfly to move into that if they're nearby already. Not the case with this. All right, let's go to Fred. Go ahead, Fred.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just seeing if my video is going to work. Start video. There we go. Here I am. Okay. I think Aaron and the mayor hit the nail on the head. In passing the California Endangered Species Act and the Federal Endangered Species Act, we're basically saying as a society, we value biodiversity. If a thing evolved, we want to keep it around. And that's what's happened here. There's a subspecies that's evolved. And the cool thing is that it evolved right here on the dunes of the former Fort Ord. Seems to be very localized around Marina and Seaside. It doesn't range very far. The northernmost occurrence is just outside of Monterey County at Sunset State Beach in Santa Cruz County. The southernmost occurrence is in Pebble Beach. It evolved because of the unique environment we have here with a very large amount of sand right near the coast. And it's limited to these tiny little patches, which are a bit like the redwoods in the Sierra Nevada, which used to be much more widespread, but as the climate changed, they restricted to these tiny little patches they have now. Same with the Gilia. I think it's generally presumed that in a prior landscape where the sands were more extensively active, there's probably quite a lot more of it. But as the sand dunes have been colonized by other plants like maritime chaparral and oak trees and things, you've just got these little patches left where it's sandy enough, just the right kind of sand that they persist. And luckily in this case, we're not talking about the ugly, miserable Gilia. It does actually happen to be a really pretty little plant with some quite remarkable biology. It's one of the features of it that you can identify it by is basically indicates that it self-pollinates. So it's evolved to figure out how to sustain a population in one little patch without needing to breed with other populations nearby very frequently.
Thank you very much. And I asked that question not because, I'm saying that we shouldn't be preserving it. So please don't misconstrue that. But what I've learned just from the speakers responding to my question was very valuable for the public too. And it's fascinating when we know other than that we have to just comply because it's an endangered species. So in this effort, I hope that we do a lot more education, and when we preserve these things, either by symbolic fencing or whatever, that we have educational plaques showing and explaining some of why this species is so important and so unique in all the world. And I think that that's worth it. But when will you just show the pictures and stuff, and it's not so available for the general public. And we are going through quite a bit of effort in order to preserve this species. And so I just wanted to ask that question. Probably I've already used up my 5 minutes, mostly on other experts speaking. So what is my time? Because I have a lot of other strategic questions, but I may not be able to go to them at this point. It's over? Okay, great.
You have 2 minutes. I turn off the timer when we're answering the questions.
Great. Okay, thank you. So there are a lot of little spots where there's maybe 1 or 2 points. And so the first question is, how do those points get there in the first place? Is it just because suddenly a seed just happened by randomness that it planted in a spot quite far away from the main planting, the main populations? How does that happen? And also, are the rules such that we are accountable for every one of those individuals? So for every one of those, we will have to think of some kind of mitigation or whatever to preserve those individual plants, because there's lots of them that they just seem strange. They're sort of out on their own. How does that happen, and what is our responsibility to those?
Erin, let's go to you first, and then we'll go to Fred for the how the distribution might change.
Sounds good. So your latter question, yes, state law requires through that definition that I had on the slide that you are liable for each and every blooming flower, and also the seed bank, the habitat. In terms of the discrete populations or 1 or 2 points, Monterey Gilead is well known for having a very variable annual variation in its populations. So what you see one year is definitely what is different than what you'll see next year. It all depends on weather, the time that you surveyed it, and also each of those populations may have little micro climate situations, or might be non-native species might be encroaching on it. It might get there might be a disturbance adjacent to it. Hydrology might have changed. So each of these little populations, hard to answer your question, but environmental variations like that would cause for these discrete populations.
And we are accountable for each and every one of them.
Every single one, and any seeds that's got there next to it.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
And Fred, can you talk about how it gets distributed and whether we're looking at these isolated individuals that are expanding its range, or are they examples of a constricting range? And these are the like the last of the Mohicans that are in a place that used to have more, but now they're just represented by a few individuals.
Yeah, so my working hypothesis is that most of the dispersal of this subspecies occurred in a prior climate when the sands were more mobile. The seeds look very similar to a sand grain. They have a mobility similar to a sand grain. They blow around a little bit more, but not much. We've seen very little evidence of new dispersal events, which is to say, 30 years ago, the original consultants after base closure did a really great job of surveying. They documented lots of little locations, and we go back to those locations, and the plants generally are right there, sometimes within a few feet of a pin flag. They're annual plants, so they grow, they produce seed, they germinate again each year, and they do that every year. So we're talking 30 generations, hasn't moved more than a couple of feet. And if you consider cases where we might have come across a plant that we didn't previously know was there, there are very few such cases. These could be evidence of new dispersal, where we're seeing how it actually might be continuing to move across the landscape, and not just, as you said, being the last of the Mohicans just sitting there in the one spot forever. There was one plant documented in a particular area of the Dunes development when the Dunes went through its environmental review. It was just one plant. There were 3 populations. The 2 were large. One was quite small. It's just this one plant. 20 years later, or maybe 15 years later, I looked really hard for plants in that spot, didn't find any over a couple of years. I think I remember Erin saying her crew did as well. So that would be maybe an example of a single seed that got dispersed somehow, maybe by a bird, germinated, grew into one plant, but did not form a persistent population. The other one that comes to mind is the fairly good population just north of the promontory. It's on the maps that Erin showed. It wasn't picked up in the original post-base closure surveys. I think it was first detected by Nikki Nedev when that area was being considered for the Canine Institute. And it's an area where the equestrians are quite active, and they've created a really mobile sand environment there. And so my working idea on that is that might actually be some new dispersal caused by the mobilizing of the sand by the horses, and not a population that was there back when the base was closed. But they're the only two cases that I can think of off the top of my head where we've come across evidence of the plant colonizing a new area in our generation.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll let others speak and then we'll come back around, Robin.
Okay, and Lane, after this first round, Robin, let's not turn off the timer on and off. It'd be kind of like the congressional hearings where they do get a certain amount of time, no matter who uses it. It's not like we lose anything. We just have to wait to come back. But the original intent was to not make someone like Elizabeth or Christina wait a half an hour before they had a chance to speak. But let's have this first round where it's fair to everybody, and then we'll go back to that other method. Let's go to Councilmember Elizabeth Fisher.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to know, is St. Gilead the same as Monterey Gilead?
Yes.
I don't know who can answer this, but is it yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And like Mayor Pro Tem Biala already mentioned, it might be good to explain to the public what I learned yesterday at the open house, that this is an annual plant that only blooms like 2 months, I think March, April, and then is kind of non-existent. And it cannot be moved. You know, I was so naive. I thought, can we pick it up and move it to another area? But no, you can only collect the seeds. So thank you for last night's open house. That was really informational. And as already has been said, it will be a balance between conservation and development. I am concerned about protecting this little plant during construction, because as we all know, gigantic trees have been accidentally taken. So my question is, what are the plans to protect this tiny little plant during construction?
Erin, that's a good one for you.
All right, let me tackle that one. Thank you for your question, and thanks for your attendance last night. It was great meeting you in person. So for that, typically when you do an environmental review for individual projects, you'll see in the CEQA document mitigation that requires protection of endangered species during construction, and usually that has to do with construction crew education and monitoring and fencing. But specifically for this take permit, this regional take permit application, we would probably propose similar activities being required for these future developments at a more programmatic level. I haven't gotten there yet, but it's a great question that will be part of the avoidance and minimization measures that are typically required as part of your permit application.
Okay, thank you for this. And I would like to know more, and probably nobody can answer this yet, but it seems that landfill HMA area can be a great site as a mitigation area. Like I've already said, maybe we can have a Monterey Gilead field there as an offsite mitigation, just as an option. If you said it's already, Erin, you said it's hard to develop probably. So that might be a very good option for mitigation.
Correct.
Okay. And then I do like Mayor Delgado's idea to look into starting the Del Monte Boulevard extension not yet for cars, but to start for pedestrians, bicycles, and the scooters. And I do realize that a solution needs to be found for Imjin and Highway 1, because that is getting worse, I think, every day. But I hope that we can see or that staff can look into an option to see if we can already get a connection just for the non-cars. So that's not a question, just a remark. And I do have one more question. The disc golf that is requested for that Salinas Reservation Road area, will there be in addition to the disc golf that has been planned for the city park at Sea Haven? So will there be 2 disc golf areas or 1?
Yes, it'll be a completely different disc golf area, actually quite a bit larger.
Okay, thank you. I have no clue about disc golf, as you can see. I will learn. So thank you. These were my questions.
All right, let's go to Councilmember Christina Medina Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Watson and Aaron Hardway for this informative session. I have several, but I'm going to ask just the one very quick one. Is understanding that we have a baseline of what's out there or what has been planted and where they live. Is there a requirement to maintain a certain amount? For example, you've talked about the Army had some ideas and numbers, and we're talking about the populations, pretty much families or generations. As part of this endangered protection status, is there a requirement that they continue to thrive? And if so, is there are there consequences, meaning financial or federal charges or something, if they're somehow found to be not thriving or not coming back? And then the last, actually, towards the end, is there any possibility, this was from a constituent, that it would ever be delisted from from this endangered species list? And then one last one. Are other jurisdictions required to do this, or only we are because it was part of the military? So just say, is the county with its property around us or Seaside? Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Would you like me to respond? Okay, great. I'll go in order. I'll try. So I'll go last to beginning. So basically, there aren't any requirements right now, except for individuals are required to comply with the federal and state Endangered Species Act. There might be there would be requirements in the incidental take permit to maintain a certain level of Gilead throughout the city based on a baseline and whatever mitigation strategy we're proposing. So there would be monitoring in perpetuity, and you need to watch for that. So yes, every individual, every jurisdiction is required to comply with these Endangered Species Acts. I don't think it would, I don't see it getting delisted in my lifetime. It's a really, really rare plant. What else am I missing?
If there was a punishment for not maintaining a population.
Yes, there is. Well, there's not a punishment for not maintaining. There's a punishment that's outlined in your permit if you're not in compliance with your permit. There is a punishment for unlawful take. If someone was to go out and bulldoze one of these populations and someone reports it to CDFW, that individual would be responsible for fines and possible criminal violations.
So it's a federal crime to take it?
And state.
Okay. And then, thank you for that. And just some clarifying, Do we know what other jurisdictions have done? I mean, are they using you? What kind of, are we doing parallel type? Are there any collaborations with its mitigation, conservation? Are we all doing the same thing?
It's a great question. I think the city of Marina has been the most proactive that I've seen. There are murmurs from other jurisdictions wanting to do something potentially similar, but Marina is really leading the way in this, and I think it's pretty amazing.
That's all I have for now. Thank you so much.
Okay, second round. Let's go to Mayor Pro Tem Kathy Biala.
Didn't even know my hand was up. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's see. So I know, Erin, that you're wanting some direction about strategy and priorities from us today, not so much voting on anything. So if I looked at this, you know, we should probably look at the ones where the city has the most to lose in terms of loss of benefits financially from a property use, et cetera, or the issue of the extension of roadways, et cetera, and then prioritize that in terms of where are the most difficult to preserve Sangillia in those areas, and then to take those populations and say, where do we have the ability to mitigate on city property? So if we took that kind of approach, is that kind of what you're wanting from us? Is because there's so many things in this plan that we could get down to so many details, you know, about every single one of these areas. But is that kind of like a strategy that you would be interested in hear from us?
Yes. And I think, like you said, I totally agree. That's a lot of information and a lot of variables. So if you focused on maybe one side of the question first, we were talking about this before the meeting, maybe if you focused on areas that you think are really important and populations that you want to see conserved and work backwards from there. Yeah. Sometimes that helps define. And again, you know, there are city needs and city wants, and you're trying to find that balance. And again, I think it's really important to understand that this is to help us inform our mitigation strategy. There are no decisions, there are no approvals happening today. It's just to give us a feel, the temperature of what the city wants to do in the future, so that we're not wasting our time submitting an application for something nobody wants.
Right. Okay. So along those lines, I'm just going to think big picture right here and just say what my thoughts are. And the three areas that I'm most concerned about is the Marina Northwest corner. And I do believe that we need that Del Monte extension. There is all the issues that we've talked about on Highway 1. There is Patton Parkway that just sort of ends right there, and all the high school traffic just dead ends there, and everybody's trying to turn around and go around. And it has a lot of stress on the other areas that feed into Patton Parkway. And then, of course, you know, we have the issues of the commercial development already being planned in that area without any kind of access to the hotels or whatever residential is being planned for that. So I think that there's a lot of compelling reasons why we need that extension. And then it also has this huge clump of Sangillia. So I think that is a priority to figure that out. And then Cypress Knolls is the next one, simply because we're already advancing on planning for that. And there's an odd kind of configuration here where there's this very large population right smack in the middle going on a long sort of, you know, piece. And I think that we ought to look at that and say, how do we reduce that and bring that mitigation to other places? Because I don't, it just seems such a strange thing that it's formed along such a long line. And then the last one, of course, is the airport business park. And that one has obvious issues, but there seemed to be one area that was clustered in between what looked like sidewalks or something. And so I wouldn't be so concerned about that, but the other areas right next to it, it seems like they would be prime for development. And so maybe we're just looking at two main populations that we would need to look at. So that those are my issues if I'm looking at it from a big picture. And I know that I brought this up last time and it seemed like there wasn't a way to do it. Maybe it was cost prohibitive, but I know that Fred Watson last night was saying that the Fortac Trail may even have sort of an elevation of the trail so that it would sort of not impact the Sangillia so much. And I was thinking if there's any way that some of these areas where the road is going to go, the Del Monte extension, if there's any way that that kind of format with the road and it looks like you're going to, planning for bicycle trail consistent with the road there too. So even if we wanted to do something now for a bike trail or pedestrian, it's already in the plan to have that right with the road. And so maybe that's a way we can conceive of it, is the first step of the road as opposed to making another separate road that isn't part of the future plan for the road as well. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know. Lane, is that possible, or Brian?
No, I think those are all things we definitely want to explore, and yet absolutely running a bike or pedestrian trail, phase it in early, absolutely. Even the Del Monte extension by itself can be phased in over different parts as the needs be. I think what we have to do is kind of come to a consensus of saying, this is our this is the design, this is where we want to go, and then figure out how we want to phase it in at that point. We'd have to look at the elevated road part. Interesting thought and concept. I don't know if we've really talked about that internally, but I think, yeah, those are all definite things we want to explore and look at different options.
But those are not necessarily what we're trying to do tonight. Just what are our priorities?
Correct, but you're giving us the exact type of discussion that we want to have. That's exactly what we want to see, what you're interested in, what you want to explore, what you have concerns about. So this is very, very helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll think of some other things as we go.
Let's go to Councilmember Elizabeth Fisher.
Yes, if it helps, Erin, I agree with the priorities that Mayor Pro Tem Biala already mentioned, those three areas. And I do have only one more question, or maybe two. Concentrating on Cypress Knolls, because we know that will be developed, or those are the plans.
Can we bring the map up, Matt?
Because
Please.
If a park would be designed that contains the Monterey Gilia, what other plants and trees could be added to make it look good year round? And how could we prevent landscape maintenance workers or even residents from pulling the plants as weeds, in the moment that they're not blooming and you cannot see how beautiful it is? Because I think it would be great if we could conserve some of the Monterey Gilia in a developed area. But so my questions are, how can we make it look good in a park year round? And how can we protect it? Thank you.
Erin, that's a difficult question. Do you want to tackle it?
Sure, I'll start. I think that's an interesting idea to contain to try to preserve the Gilead in the center of that Cypress Knolls development. It may or may not work depending on the level of activity adjacent. It would be right now it's being left alone. So Sanguinea cohabitates with the number of other species. Some, I guess, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Some plants are prettier than others to some people. However, I do know that trees and Gilead don't get along too much due to the shade and the organic duff underneath the trees or changes in hydrology. They're pretty, they need open spaces. So yeah, it might not be as attractive as some of the other landscaped areas of a project site. But I do find maritime chaparral and coastal dune quite beautiful. In terms of protecting long-term, you may or may not want to put symbolic fencing around it, signage. We often do education with construction and landscape crews to educate them and put timing restrictions on activities to avoid impacts in conservation areas.
Yes, thank you, because I think it will be important to know whether it would be feasible to have it in a developed area or not at all. Because before people start designing, the development of that area, we need to know whether it can work or not. But maybe if the area around this is large enough to add more plants, that will be there year round. But it will have to be looked in before the plans are being made. So thank you.
Couple of questions, and then I wanted to run through some comments about important priority areas. Salinas Avenue, where there's interest in a disc golf course, would it be simpler, less work, CEQA-wise, California Environmental Quality Act, to put in a quote, temporary, unquote, disc golf course, given that it might take 10 to 30 years to commercialize, compared to rezoning it if it's not already zoned for open space uses? So I guess my overall question there is, how difficult would it be to do the CEQA and get some temporary use, a few years, 10 years of disc golf course before we decide what to do otherwise? As long as we protect Gilead, how much work would it be to allow that use?
Yeah, so I think we've been working with Nick Kite behind the scenes, and we think that is very doable. We think at least the discussions have been that temporary disc golf use wouldn't impact the Gilead as long as you developed around it, and having some of the disturbance that area actually may help. And so we actually are expecting to bring this back to the council in the next month or two with a proposal. And yeah, we absolutely think that that this is a good use for that site temporarily.
Okay, great. All right, can we go to the 2C development scenario? And I want to talk about Cypress Knolls. Elizabeth, Councilmember Vischer was just talking about it in the vein that I want to talk about it as well. And that is that development scenario 2C, it pinches the Gilead areas, and it looks better on a map as being feasible than it often translates in daily life when you go right up to the boundaries of the sensitive area and you have people living nearby and you have pets and you have dumping and you have small spot fires that have to be put out by heavy equipment or hand lines that have to be dug to put those fires out. And so, true or false, or what's your opinion, Erin, on trying to manage rare plants like shown there? If we were just to go with this scenario, how hard would it be to actually allow that species to thrive and move around a little bit in perpetuity?
That's a great question. I don't have much faith that it would be successful over the long term. However, what's interesting is that, the site is vacant now, but it was a bustling housing community back in the day, and yet the seeds remain and they're there. So it's an interesting dilemma in terms of they do need some disturbance, but can't handle too much. So the Goldilocks approach to this site is an interesting one, and I haven't decided how I feel about it yet in terms of an approach to take, whether we just decide to take the Gilead and the entire parcel and try not to keep it, or we preserve a larger area, fence it off. I don't know. Something that we look forward to talking to Dr. Watson and CDFW about their thoughts too.
Okay. And you bring up a good point. When you talk about how the Army developed cypress knolls, they cherry pick the high spots, the flat spots. And so there's a lot of unused open space in between. And obviously that's where these Gilead are. They're not where the buildings were. But we still don't know if there was a lot more Gilead or about the same amount before the Army developed the area. So there could have been 10 times as much Gilead. We don't know that. But the way they develop these days, if you look at phase 3, they cut down every single tree where a house is going to go. They massively grade everything flat, and they pack in the homes side by side like little sardines. Very different than the look of cypress knolls now. And so there's a lot more potential impact the way they do things nowadays. Of course, it's within our control, but within the history of Marina's four-door developments, there's not much room left by the time the horizontal changes have happened in order to get the development going. Okay, just very quickly, I think that we can preserve most of Preston Park. I think we can preserve almost all of the Northwest HMA outside of the El Monte extension, and there's quite a bit of Gilead there. I think we can preserve all, if not most, of the Salinas Avenue. I think we can preserve all of the landfill. I don't think we have any plans for 8th Street North and South. It leaves for development the airport and the Del Monte extension, and a big question mark at Cypress Knolls, which has been talked about by others recently. The last thing I want to say is that we really need to do something now in the caretaker status of a plan to preserve what we got. The Torrey Pines in the north and the south 8th Street area, they don't mix well as trees with San Gilead or Maritime chaparral, and they're spreading as some of us know. The cypress and other invasive trees like eucalyptus and other trees are having their way in cypress knolls, and we're not watching, we're not doing anything about it. The ice plant, of course, has been around quite a while. The grass out at the airport, not just the pampas grass, but the Hartza grass from South Africa, that is really a problem and likely spreading. And then there's the ongoing impacts of people, unconstrained going through some of our areas, running through and living in the area of the Northwest HMA. So all this planning is great and it needs to continue. What option do we have to start doing some on the ground beneficial management?
So are you talking inside the HMA areas or outside the HMA?
All these areas we talked about, 8th Street, North and South, Salinas Avenue, the Northwest HMA, they have problems going on. Airport, big time, but we're not doing anything. So what's the chance that while we continue the planning, and this came up and it was in Aaron's slideshow, we didn't get to it tonight, but it was in the slideshow. We ended last time a year ago saying, yeah, we got to plan, but we also have to concurrently get started on the ground because we're losing the resource for planning to protect, and that doesn't make any sense.
Well, I might hop in here, Lane, and just suggest, obviously, you would need to find funding for such work. But maybe a subcommittee of Bruce, Mayor, of what you've seen out there and potential volunteers that could help, work on these areas and do non-native species removal and avoid take while doing it. So it doesn't turn into a bigger project than it needs to be. Because once it turns into a big project, then it's a long CEQA and permitting process again. So, I mean, I'd be happy to talk to you about some of the ways that you could move that forward. And I think with the volunteers that the city is known to have, all the great volunteers that you have, that I see you post all about all the time, you could probably get some movement and great participation.
Has there been any discussion between you and city staff during the last year about this?
A little bit.
What's the conclusion of that discussion?
I haven't had a conclusion yet. Aaron, what's the status really on our habitat management plan?
We're currently, we're about ready to get ready for some public outreach meetings with the community and the resource agencies and stakeholders to present our draft baseline maps and narratives.
And so how far away on a timeline before that plan is adopted and we start implementation of it?
Well, I think it's a separate question, Lane, because I think the mayor is talking about managing areas that aren't HMAs.
Well, that's what I was trying to distinguish up front. Are these?
I was talking about all the areas we've been talking about: North and South H Street, the Northwest HMA, the airport.
That was my understanding, and so I think I'm trying to look at the delta here. When the plans can be completed, adopted, moving forward, is it 4 months, 6 months, and then and if it's a longer period of time, then I would suggest, Mayor, that as we go through our retreat process yet this year, and see if that's a priority of the council that they just wants to move forward prior to implementation of that plan, and work on allocate funds and resources to start to address some of those invasive species and maintain the area.
All right. Let's move to Kathy, Mayor Pro Tem Biala, and then afterwards I want to ask Fred if he's seen any of these invasives actually threatening the occupied Gilead areas. But let's go to Mayor Pro Tem Kathy Biala.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Aaron, so are you prepared to answer the question? If we say that the northwest corner, Cypress Knolls, and the airport, given those populations of San Gilead, do we have enough off-site mitigation areas for what might be necessary on those three? On those three, do we have enough areas?
I don't know the answer to that right now.
Okay. And I'm not suggesting that we do 100% take, not by any means.
Right.
So, even if it was like 50 to 75%, do we have enough areas that we could mitigate upon?
And Mayor Pro Tem, I think that's the whole point of tonight, is for us to give them what you said about 20 minutes ago, and then let them crunch the numbers. And they're going to come up with different scenarios to try to meet the numbers, but it's going to take some analysis.
Right.
Exactly. And we really need that as we go and talk with CDFW. And so once we kind of have a sense of the direction of the council, that's what we'll take CDFW and then we'll start to get a sense from them of what they will require.
Right.
And we just really don't have that sense right now.
Okay. And the reason I ask that is because if we don't have enough, is it possible for the city to purchase some land for this use, or to negotiate with a neighboring property owner about possible purchase or use of their property.
Erin, can you answer
Sure.
that?
Sure. Yes, there's definitely that potential. We're looking inward now internally to stay within the city and keep it within the city. But if wants and needs are greater than what we have, we could look and outreach to other jurisdictions and property owners.
Yeah,
but that
because
does complicate the process as we talked about last night.
yes, because there was one little triangle near the Salinas Reservation Road parcel that you said was kind of a leftover because the Sea Haven didn't want to buy it and it's still under the ownership of the previous property owner that Sea Haven sold them to. So it may be so small, there's really no use for them, that particular owner. And so it's right abutting of a really prime Sangilla populations. And so it might be perfect for that. I don't know. But anyway, just to let that option be, if we don't have enough areas ourselves, that we should expand out. Because when we give priority to these three, these are the most valuable properties for development for the city. And we should maybe think out of the box if we can't make the round peg fit in the square hole.
I appreciate that direction. Thank you.
Okay, and then let's see. And this is a question for Lane. How long do you think the Del Monte extension could take? I mean, are we looking at 10 years really, or can this scenario happen much earlier than that?
That's a really good question. It's going to depend on availability of funding, different priorities of the council. It's also going to depend on traffic congestion, those traffic patterns. As I think Councilmember Vischer talked about, I've noticed in the past couple months on Imogen, as you go south, it used to be the backup was in the rush hour in the morning. Now you start to see it 3 and 4 and 5. And so like last couple of weeks, you'll sit there at 5 o'clock trying to go southbound. Highway 1 is flowing. There's no traffic on Highway 1. And we're backed up all the way to California. And so we just have a lot of work to do in that area, but I can't say if it's going to take 5 years, 10 years when the funding's available.
Right, and the funding is not just from the city, right? Obviously, we can do other sources, right?
We'll definitely try for grant funding, for state funding. I don't hold my breath out, but yeah, we'll pursue all sources.
Okay, all right, thank you, because that area does have so much Sangilla, and we have to make some kind of plans about it.
And definitely a phased approach. Realistically, once you have a design and a plan approved in place, then you can just look at your phased approach as you're able to afford it.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Let's go to Councilmember Medina Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I had some excellent points here. I do have to agree that the Cypress Knoll site is among one of my top concerned areas because of the development that has been long coming and the need for our housing options in our community. With that goes the extension, which, Caltrans and us working together, that we need to start somewhere on that. It's hard to tell constituents why we have or have them believe us that this was all planned in terms of the amount of traffic coming through. So, and the disc golf also, that grove, I've bought into the belief that having a presence in that grove would essentially allow for us to be much more aware of what's going on. It happens to be a place where many unhoused people may set up shop. It might give residents, a sense of a growing sense of ownership in that grove. It's a passive recreational opportunity. And as we build our city with lots of recreational opportunity that differentiates ourselves from other communities, I think that's kind of a key to this. The other big one for me is the airport. As we move forward with, our partnership or our large tenant out there of Joby, I think, and other business incubation out there, that one for me is the perfect example of having to allow nature to coexist with business. So those are some of mine. And then just the other one, it just keeps coming back into my head, is the other properties. I wrote down the dump, but as I saw on that map, the border, we're going to be having some housing coming out in the Marina Station area. I think this would be a prime question to ask the county what they're doing or what they're planning to do. And as you say, we've taken the lead on this. Well, this is something that we can show some leadership, that we are committed to our environment. We hope they are too. So just to sort of give you my roadmap of what I'm thinking, those happen to be some of my, they're all very important. And I'm quite impressed that this delicate, doesn't look delicate, it actually looks pretty hardy to me, but this flower has managed to weather the stomping of, soldiers and heavy equipment and housing. It's just like Marina, it's tough. So I look forward to maybe making it our city, I'm going off topic here, our city flower or something, but really taking it under the arms as we do with things that matter to us when it comes to our environment. So thank you.
Councilmember Medina Dirksen. Let's go to Councilmember Elizabeth Fisher.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just one more question. How long ago have these plans been surveyed for the very first time? So how old is the oldest data?
Great question. Definitely before the 90s, I would say, and before it got listed in what, Fred, 87, you think? What's your oldest survey that you know about? I have to pass to Dr. Watson.
I was just looking it up. It's right around 1990. It all kicked in upon base closure. There was two questions there. That was the earliest survey date, and what was the other question?
No, so what is the earliest data that you have?
Yeah, it's about 1990.
Okay, so from before the closure.
Yeah, it was after the announcement of closure. Maybe perhaps before the final closure. There was a few year period there during which the closure occurred.
And if I can add a question, are the numbers comparable to what you have seen at your most recent survey, or do you see lots of variation, or is it quite stable?
You get a mix. There's some populations that have been extirpated, so they appear to be gone. There are some that are dramatically reduced. There are some that are thriving now and were thriving then. There may be a small number where we think we're seeing more now than we used to. So it's a mix. I think
and
with respect to the ones that we've talking. Sorry. Oh, just with respect to the ones we've been talking about this evening, I think for the most part the numbers have been fairly consistent between the recent surveys and the ones from 30 years ago. It's a very general statement.
Okay, thank you. Because it will be interesting, of course, to know why or what areas the plants are thriving. Because if we are going to mitigate, of course, we would like them to succeed. So if you have any indication what areas might be better than others, but that might be impossible what I'm asking. No, it's possible.
Yeah, there are definitely some places where they appear to be kind of barely hanging on now, and there are some places where this is definitely good habitat, and you really want to protect it because you've got the potential there to preserve a large population forever much more easily than some of the more marginal spots.
So maybe that information can be added by Erin for the next presentation. Yeah. Thank you both very much. Thank you.
Yeah, Elizabeth, the first publication on Fort Ord's Gilia distribution was the 1992 base-wide flora and fauna survey that Aaron referred to earlier. And it was very general. And I think what Aaron's crew and Fred have done is they've added a lot more specifics to it, even if it didn't change the general areas where this plant grows. They were so general. They would say like, oh, there's a low density over these 500 acres or 300 acres. And since that time, what Aaron and Fred have done is said, well, actually, they're here, here, and here in that 500 acres, and they add up to about 3 acres, not 500 acres. So it was like a broad brush done in the early 90s, and Fred and Aaron have colored that in with very finer scale of information. It's really more useful for what we're talking about tonight than what we got in those early Army surveys, which were really helpful, but just not as specific. They only had a matter of weeks to do their whole base on all kinds of plants and animals. And Fred has taken years and DDA has taken years of painstaking repetitive surveys to fill in all these details we know today. So we're very lucky that not always do you have all the information that we have in this case. So Fred, are you concerned at all about the Torrey Pines and the 8th Street north and south, or the Harta and Pampas, 2 different grasses out in the airport? Have you seen Gilia populations being impacted by invasives that bring concern to you or not? Maybe they're just disparate in their distribution.
Yeah, absolutely. So the broad answer there is that if we do nothing, there are a number of negative impacts occurring now that could be stopped if we did something about them. And there's a few different categories of that, but one is encroachment by non-native plants. And I made a little list: ice plant, eucalyptus, acacia, Monterey cypress, Monterey pine, Torrey pine, French broom, pampas grass, panic belt grass, and European annual grasses came to mind. Specifically, eucalyptus is a threat to the Marina High School population. Monterey cypress and pine are at the Salinas Avenue population. Torrey pine is expanding very rapidly throughout this area. The one particular example I can think of where there's a big Torrey pine overhanging and kind of crowding out what hopefully is still a Gilia population, but I kind of wonder every year if it's going to get extirpated. And that one is, it's either in the landfill or the UC 8th Street property. It's right near the boundary of those two. And we could, if we don't do anything about the Torrey pine, we can only expect quite a bit more of that. This is a species that's actually a listed species in its own right down in San Diego. And it grows in sandy areas down there, and it does really well here. And yeah, it's the most aggressively expanding native species we have right now, I would say. Pampas grass would give it a run for its money, perhaps, but it's really taken up in the last 10 years in particular. French broom is impacting the population just near the equestrian center. And then, ice plants kind of ever present. But an example of that would be the densest Gilia I can recall seeing is in the Cypress Knolls area. And I was just looking at a photo of it. I could share it on my screen if you want. It's got ice plant right there in the background. So I haven't been back to it, but I'm guessing that ice plant is winning the battle in that spot. And that's not ice plant taking over a marginal Gilia area. That's one of the best spots we've got.
All right, thanks, Fred. So my take on it is, it's so easy to rely on documents and planning, but we've known for a while that what's going on the ground is not in Gilead's favor, and we know we're going to take care of it in the future. And we also know in all aspects of life, the longer you wait, the more expensive and the larger the effort it is to do what you could have done today or yesterday. So I hope that we kind of get it in gear on the management that we're going to have to do anyway, instead of just focusing on the documents because it's simpler. even though it's not simple, it's simpler than actually doing something about the problem on the ground. Okay, let's go to Mayor Pro Tem Kathy Biala.
That is a really great point, that we can bend over backwards to save the Gilead. And if we're not going to do anything with the surrounding plants and species that are actually a detriment to it, we're sort of, going backwards, when we're trying to go forward. So I think that the minute that we understand which Gilead populations we are going to preserve, hopefully we'll know that sooner than later, then I think we need to have a concerted effort about studying the surrounding areas and do some maintenance and prevention for that habitat as well. I wanted to confirm whether this is true. When for the sites that on these maps have a lot of Gilead on them, does that mean that those are the places where it is most conducive to growth? I mean, can we assume that when we see clusters, that's a really good place for mitigation, for example? Is that a correct assumption?
Yes. And Fred could probably answer that more, but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the plants are telling you in those maps
Right.
where the best habitat is.
Yes. Okay. So that tells us mitigation sites, as well as tells us, well, if they're concentrated in the high valued properties, that means we have to maybe consider mitigation, but then we can look at the map and know where the good places are, even though, like, the landfill, like Aaron was saying, would be a really good place, right? Isn't that what you said, Aaron, earlier? That the landfill area would be a really great place for the population to thrive.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential. I mean, the plants are telling you, but as Dr. Watson mentioned too, there are existing threats to these populations that could have been encroached on. So there might be a seed bank under some of that ice plant or pampas grass. So, I mean, there are some restoration opportunities as well as preservation opportunities. And it's a mixed bag with these various sites, as Dr. Watson mentioned, all the different situations.
Right, because if I look at the landfill, I don't particularly see some of the denser populations, but you're saying that there can be mitigating factors for that. So it still could be a really good place. It's just that it hasn't been maintained to be a good site.
Right, we can't burn the landfill.
But I think there's more to it than that too. I think that the further south and the further east you go, the less suitable the habitat becomes as a trend. And so when you look at the landfill with the, relatively few dots compared to north and west of there, it depicts that trend. So my assumption is the landfill is not as good of a place for mitigation as a place closer to the coast that had good Gilead now that was available for mitigation.
And then by the same token, the areas closer to the coast, however, are the most valuable to the city. So therein lies the problem.
Right. But I think, and you can tell it from these maps, I think we have some really good solutions. And like where we drew those circles on the scenario 2C, which is trying to mitigate to the maximum extent. Yet there are circles around all those big populations, meaning those are absolutely going to stay there. And it's really for two reasons. Number one, they thrive there. But the other part is those are huge populations. If you try to mitigate those offsite, we may not ever have enough land to be able to mitigate offsite. So there's multiple reasons of why you're trying to protect those good areas and really help them to thrive in the future.
Thank you, Lane. Okay, even though the public, they had a chance last night to talk, and we're not really encouraged last night to participate or talk. So tonight was more like our chance as the council but not everyone in the public was able to go yesterday, and they might have some things they learned they want to tell us tonight. But anyway, let's go to the public comment now. Each has up to 3 minutes should you wish to use it. And we'll start with Karen Anderson. Thank you for being patient tonight, Karen.
Thank you, Mayor Delgado and council and staff and Aaron. It was great to meet you last night, Aaron. So my points are, wow, here we are. We're the worldwide host of Sanguilia, and I think we should do as much as possible to protect it wherever it's found. And, you know, we already know that the city has a 0% success rate of mitigation, such as in the case of the location or the relocation of Sanguilia from the Holiday Inn Express site over on Reservation Road near the library. And in my neighborhood, I watched Sea Haven developers grade away a population just off of Carmel Avenue. And I'm wondering, has there been follow through regarding that extirpation they did? So that's an important question. And then I'd also like to thank Mayor Delgado for bringing up the possibility of a 4-tag type trail during the interim period and along the proposed Del Monte extension / Caltrans right of way until the actual road ever happens. So thank you very much. And I hope that the council will direct everybody to conserve as much Sanguilia as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And we'll answer your question as soon as public comments over about Sea Haven. Okay, anyone else? Please raise your hand if you'd like to speak tonight. Give everyone a moment or two. Come on, Rachel Sanders, you must have some comments from all this information you heard tonight. Oh, there we go. Let's go to Rachel Saunders from the Big Sur Land Trust. Thanks for being with us tonight, Rachel.
Well, since you prompted me, I just want to compliment everyone and the city of Marina for taking such care. And as I think Aaron mentioned, it's really kind of extraordinary, and you should be commended for the care and thoughtfulness that you are considering the future of this little plant, but also the care in terms of the development in Marina. And I just think it's something to be commended and duplicated actually in other cities. So I think that's really all I have to say. You know, we're certainly supportive of taking this thoughtful approach and conserving as much Gilia and associated habitat as possible, recognizing the need to develop portions of the city so it's a prosperous place. So we appreciate the care you're taking in balancing those considerations. So thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I talked to Rachel at an event recently, and I found out she has 30 years plus of land conservation management and species management protection. So I thought it would be good to call her out. And she's involved in the Cemex plant and the existing Martin Dunes just north of the Cemex plant. So she's already in an organization that's doing a lot with the same kind of dune species we're talking about tonight. All right, let's go to Dr. Watson. And I want to thank you, Fred. You know, we wouldn't be as far along as we are without you, and Aaron, for all the field work you've done. And Aaron, your decades of experience that you bring to help us is worth a great amount to us. And the staff working with you have done a really good job of understanding and learning and becoming experts themselves. So thanks to everybody, staff included. And Fred, now you'll be speaking as a member of the public.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. This is not what some folks are going to want to hear. I really appreciate this process and the conversations and the work I've been part of. I just want to talk about the high school population. It's a really large one, and it's not quite unique, but it's close to it. It's one of the 4 or 5 large ones near the coast. And if we just go through them, there's the one at Navy Dunes, in which we invested a lot of our sort of regional conservation weight, I guess. Until this year, it was accidentally graded by its own contractors, which suddenly kind of revealed that even the ones that we're looking at and we're monitoring every year are frail. There's the Sand City one, which has amazingly survived in a fairly large population despite the ice plant, but currently has real estate signs that are trying to sell the land for residential development. There's the one that was reported during the original base closure surveys as having 10,000 plants inside Marina State Beach that we've resurveyed a few times now, and have found 2 orders of magnitude fewer plants. There's one that I...
Excuse me, Fred, is that you found 1,000 plants or 100 plants?
They're in the region of less than 100. So from 10,000 down to less than 100. Then there's the one up at the Salinas River State Beach, which is in good shape, for about 4,000 plants. And then there's the one at the high school. I'm not sure the numeric, the actual number, but it's in that order of magnitude of those other ones I mentioned. So among the big ones near the coast, where you're still in a more active dune situation, it's not quite an active dune, but it's still fairly bare ground and fairly loose sand. This is really one of 2. This one and Salinas River State Beach that haven't experienced a really substantial reduction or threat recently. So to me, ecologically, it makes no sense to have any impact to the core area of that. And I think Fish and Wildlife would see it the same way. I think it'd just be a total waste of time to kind of pursue any design that has a road going through that polygon that delineates the large area there, especially when you've got the Caltrans right of way just to the west. I agree that we haven't surveyed the Caltrans right of way. Just looking at the habitat, it seems unlikely to me that we're going to find a lot of plants there, not anything like we see on that fairly open hill where the plants are now. So despite the extra cost and time, I think it's going to be the best use of money and time in the long run to look at that Caltrans right away for future infrastructure.
All right. Thank you, Fred. Let's close public comment. And I know Karen Anderson was really appalled and concerned when she saw the grading at Sea Haven, and it was pretty brutal. And it was kind of complicated when the city tried to figure out what was going on. Can you give us the lowdown, Lane, on if what they did was okay, or if there's any mitigation that has to happen because of what they did?
Yeah, Aaron or Matt, can you help with that a little bit? It's my understanding the whole Sea Haven property was a mess. All the on-site mitigation, and there was problems on the CDFW side too. But my understanding is what they graded there, they had the right to do. It was they were allowed to do that from the original permits that were issued. Doesn't make it right, but yeah, that's my understanding, is that the whole mitigation that was supposed to have been done, it never was completed, and what they did, they legally could do.
Anything to add, Aaron?
I'm actually, Karen brought this up to me last night at the open house, and I thought that area was already graded. I wasn't aware that it was regraded, but it was under the original permitted area. So I actually can't weigh in with the legality or anything with this, but there was an existing permit that Sea Haven is working under, but I don't know if they're in compliance with that. It's something to look into.
Okay, and I think that the looking into staff already did what they're going to do. And what Lane told us, a minute ago is the conclusion.
Okay.
And so Lane, did you even have on your radar doing anything more about that grading near Carmel and Salinas Avenue?
No, we've looked at it as far as we can, and our focus is working with CDFW now on other issues.
Okay, so that's the answer to Karen's question. I just wanted to be clear to Karen on what the answer was. All right, so given what Dr. Watson said, he basically said it's a no-brainer that we cannot expect to build the Second Avenue extension except on the very complicated and 15, 20-year process of working with Caltrans to put it in their right-of-way. So Lane, what's your response to that?
So, especially here, we know, well, we don't know, but from what Dr. Watson said just about the uniqueness of that species, we can, if we get direction from council, we can start working with Caltrans, and it may be a 1 to 2 year process just to see if that is an option that they could work with us on and move it into their right of way. At the same time, work with them on options of the design and see if there's something that would work. And so we can certainly do that. I don't see anything on that road getting built in the next couple of years. And so from a timeline, it doesn't matter. The only thing that's getting built right now is the part of Second Avenue that's coming up CDEC Hill. They are working on that right now, and my understanding is the paving will be completed probably by May or June of this year, so that Second Avenue will go right up to the top of the hill. The current top of the hill actually will be about 15 feet lower than what it is.
Lane, can I just add that Coastal Commission, if we're going to be working with Caltrans, Coastal Commission would also be coordination with that over the next 1 to 2 years.
And can I also add, just as Nordine is speaking, if we are going to explore that option, my suggestion would be to conduct a San Gilia survey in that area just to see what we have. I mean, if we have the same amount of take that wouldn't be necessary, then we're not achieving much. So my suggestion would be just to do that survey first, see what we have, and then if it's far less than what we're dealing with the current alignment, then maybe that's an option we can pursue.
Yeah, that's a great point, Nordine. I think we assume there's 0 Gilia, but finding out if there's a lot of Gilia or 0 Gilia or whatever is going to be really important going ahead, moving in the Caltrans, we're going to need that information. I think it's great. And we're coming up to the blooming season very soon in a couple of months, 3 months. So it's really a good idea. So if I were to give direction tonight, it would be number 1, do what Nordine just said, plan for that survey to happen on Caltrans. Number 2, get some kind of a communication with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife Service that might be a letter. The deliverable might be a letter to whom it may concern. This area of San Gilia, Monterey Gilia is so important. We do not see a way to develop it with a road, so that with the survey of probably, with the survey done on Caltrans property and a written letter from CDFW about not being able to go through the property east of Caltrans, it seems like that would help the Caltrans process along. But anyway, number 1, get that survey done. Number 2, try to get CDFW engaged in their opinions. Like, do they agree with Dr. Watson? Which they probably will. But then the number 3 thing, for me, it would be to start taking steps toward putting in a 4-tag-like trail to get everybody from Central Marina back and forth through the Fort Ord part of Marina without waiting for this road, which is, so far into the future, so difficult and complicated as we're learning just in the last 20 minutes. So that would be my direction: survey, CDFW, and 4-tag-like trail, and then be taking it up with Caltrans with those tools in hand from the survey and CDFW. Let's go to Mayor Pro Tem Kathy Biala.
You're muted, Kathy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with those steps. However, I don't want to lose valuable time barking up a tree that it will never be. I mean, not only are we saying about Caltrans, but now if we add in the Coastal Commission as well, because that property will require it. So I do think we have to know if there's Sanguilia population, but also if we reach out to certain key people to find out even if there's any possibility whatsoever, if there are no Sanguilia plants there, then I would hope that we don't waste a year barking up a tree that is going to be, and in just what everyone has said is maybe a total impossibility. So I would like to add also that at the same time we look at the plans again and try to maybe reconfigure it, and maybe even think the extraordinary other options of making an elevated road over these populations, if that's possible, or whatever else that we can think of. Because if that seems like an impossibility, it may be no less impossible than us trying to get Caltrans to give up their property for us. So just add that in too, that we have to be really creative on this. And I don't want to waste time when Caltrans may be completely, almost completely not a possibility for us. It may be a pipe dream for us. And so we need to be planning and exploring as many options as we can, including mitigation, I would say as well. I mean, I don't want to omit that either.
And I will just share one conversation I had with one of their, I forget the gentleman's title, but when we first explored the option, he really flat out laid it out to me, saying that Caltrans rarely gives up this access control point, which is the point of allowing no construction onto their right of way in this proximity to the off-ramp and to the highway. So he said very, very, very rarely would headquarters consider such a request. It has to be a very compelling and very strong reasoning, and it's a long process. So that was his own words that he shared with me. So yeah, it will be a difficult proposition and a little bit lengthy as well.
Yeah, and for that reason, I hope that we're not going to do this in a stepwise progression of getting a no finally from Caltrans before we start grappling with what should we do. I hope that doesn't happen. And I would like to see the trail that the mayor is suggesting be as consistent with what we have as a proposal right now in terms of the route of access across that property that's already contemplated about the road going through there right now for the Del Monte extension. I mean, there can be some additional things, but at least that we make use of what we think might be a possibility for a bike trail.
And I think the existing plan, it's a separate bike trail is very similar to the 4-tag type. So I don't see a problem with that at all.
Okay.
I wonder, Lane, if we as a city could put in an assumed, 10-year life of a four-tag like trail that might be less costly because it's not meant to last 30 or 40 or longer years. If there's some kind of a less than permanent, because if we end up using Caltrans right away, which sounds very unlikely, then we have this trail over here to the east that's not part of, the Del Monte extension if it moves west. So I just wonder what the time is going to take to do anything with a road, and the uncertainty of where that road's going to be. If there's something less than permanent that we could put in a bike ped trail, that would be great. So I know that Aaron and everyone wrote down the other things that we said, but the points that I'd like to hammer away at, I guess, is, what do we do to get a plan for caretaking status so we don't lose what we're trying to plan to keep? Yeah, I guess that was the only point that I would like to make before we end. All right, any other direction from council? And if no one objects to what Kathy or I have said, we'll just assume that, it's by consensus, we're going that direction. Any more input? Let's go to Mayor Pro Tem Kathy Biala.
Just wanted to ask Aaron, do you have enough to go on for tonight?
Yes, this was amazing. This
This was
turned out way
great.
better than I thought.
Great.
So thank you. I appreciate the time and effort you took to understand all these different layers and these different variables. And we really appreciate the direction and look forward to continuing to move this forward.
Thank you, Aaron. And Fred, maybe your homework, professors don't normally get homework, but maybe your homework could be to give us a couple spots that you think are a no-brainer. We got to get out there as soon as possible and evaluate them and come up with some actions that either volunteers or the city could, just so we get our teeth wet or whatever, our feet wet, getting going on doing some actual management so we enhance what we know we're going to want to keep instead of just kind of looking the other way. But maybe if you helped us pick a couple of relatively small spots where we could make a difference, that would get us in that track.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I can accept my homework assignment.
And I know of a high schooler who needs some community service hours.
Now that person wasn't building any forts in the wrong areas, was he?
No, he was not.
Okay.
He talked about that tonight. It was funny. All right.
All right. Anything more that anybody needs, Lane?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you so
This
much.
really was a great discussion across the board. We'll definitely follow up and probably do a write-up on some of these items and get it back to the council in a couple of weeks. And we'll keep charging forward quickly.
All
And
right.
thanks to Dr. Watson too. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank
And there's
you.
a lot of staff tonight that have been here the whole time. Our fire chief and planning staff with Nick and Steve Riso, our future chief, and police chief, our current chief, Tina. Thank you, everybody. Guido, for being with us tonight and just hearing all of this, because it's going to come up again. And it's great. The more people that know about it, really appreciate you sitting through this. Thanks, Guido. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
No.
Right.